The Download. I'm Christine Niles. Michael Voris is away on a speaking engagement. He'll be returning Monday. Today we have Rodney Pelletier once again joining us on the panel. As many of you who've been following Church and Militant know, we have a deep devotion to Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, an amazing author and preacher whose Emmy Award-winning TV show was watched by millions. In fact, we are at this very moment sitting in the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen studio, named after him because it was through his intercession that we were able to purchase this studio. We've published multiple reports over the last 2 years on the deadlock between the New York Archdiocese and the Diocese of Peoria, Illinois, in a tussle over who would get Sheen's remains. In 2002, Bishop Daniel Janke of Peoria started Sheen's cause for sainthood, and that's because Sheen grew up in Peoria. He went to seminary there, and he was ordained a priest there. So it was only natural that his cause for canonization should begin there. Bishop Janke has spent about $1 million advancing his cause over the past 14 years, relying on the promises of the late Cardinal Edward Egan, former head of the New York Archdiocese, that Peoria would eventually get Sheen's body, which right now lies in the crypt beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. But in 2014, Cardinal Timothy Dolan flat out refused to release Sheen's remains, failing to honor Egan's promises. It led Sheen's closest living relative and niece, Joan Sheen Cunningham, to file a lawsuit in August asking that the court order Dolan to hand over her uncle's body. Well, yesterday, the court issued its ruling. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Simon to fill us in on the details.
Yeah, I noticed the lawyer hands over to me to do the thing. Okay, so this is the ruling. It is essentially 10 pages.
I've spoken to Joan Sheen Cunningham multiple times throughout this, as we were reporting on this, and when she initially filed her lawsuit it's not a lawsuit, it's a petition to the court to please move my uncle's body over to Peoria. New York wrote a counter argument saying, well, these are the reasons why he should not be moved. And one of the things they trotted out was this testimony by Monsignor Hilary Franco, who claimed, oh, I was great friends with Sheen. We had so many discussions. We were very close friends. And
we were tight.
Right, we were tight. And he told me all the time that he was so honored that they wanted to, bury me in St. Patrick's, etc. Well, Joan submitted a kind of a petition, a reply to Hilary Franco, and she basically completely smacks this down. She said back in, I think it was September, she said, Monsignor Franco claims that during, quote, conversations allegedly had with my uncle that he was fond of repeating this fact that he was, offered to be buried in St. Patrick's. And she said, okay, there was nobody in the world closer to my uncle than me. He basically raised her as a daughter.
She was
and she
like
says,
his daughter. Yeah.
My uncle never told me of any such purported offer made by Cardinal Cook. And I spoke with Joan Sheen Cunningham. I just basically was very frank with her. I said, so what do you think about this? She said, I think he's just making out of thin air.
So this is so
basically she thinks he's lying through his teeth, which is kind of a scary thought. If this is a Monsignor, he takes an oath in court before God, swearing not to perjure himself. And yet if he's up there lying about this, then he should be fearful for his soul.
But his name is Hillary, so there is precedent.
Oh, actually, I spoke with Joan Sheen Cunningham's lawyer, Steve Cohn. And of course, he's very happy with this. He said that the attorneys for New York, he's already spoken with them, and they've been very gracious, and they're willing to move this thing forward. It doesn't look like Cardinal Dolan's going to appeal this thing, which is good.
Well, it's the Supreme
That
Court
would be very
already.
dumb.
How do you appeal?
Well, no, in New York here.
New York is weird.
It is, because
for many reasons.
The New York Appeals Court is the highest court. The New York Supreme Court, there are a bunch of them, and they're actually the trial court. It's a little bit weird in New York. But New York does things differently, I guess. But anyway, I spoke with Steve Cohn, Joan Sheen Cunningham's lawyer, before this show, and I asked him, so this was quite the smackdown of Archdiocese of New York, and he just laughed. He just laughed. So anyway, Brad, the very reason that the New York Archdiocese offered to bury Archbishop Sheen in the crypt of St. Patrick's Cathedral was to make up for all the years that they treated him terribly. So what's the backstory there? Why did the New York Archdiocese treat Sheen so terribly?
Well, the person who actually said that quote was Cardinal Terence Cook. He said, we're going to make up for all the years of Sheen's propagation of the faith, which is the missions, for millions of dollars. And he used the donation of powdered milk that was given to the church by the government free of charge. I don't know if it was leftover surplus World War II stuff or what, but it was given free of charge.
That's what he called it.
And everybody knew that he was just being kicked out there. And so he couldn't be on the radio. He was already off TV. He couldn't be writing books. He had to administer a diocese. And by all accounts, Sheen really wasn't that good at administering a diocese. No. And that lasted for about 3 years. But the final year in '67, Spellman died. And 2 years later, Sheen was given by the church a title of Archbishop, recognizing his role in service to the church. So yeah, there wasn't any, great enduring love. It was a cross, and he just said, "Bury me in Calvary," and the judge called that out. He said, "He didn't ask to be buried in New York. Just throw me in Calvary."
For this, because she had the tenacity and the toughness to go up against the very powerful Cardinal Archbishop of New York. This is Joan Sheen Cunningham.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about her.
Well, she basically grew up with Bishop Sheen. He was like a father to her.
Did that to St. John Vianney during his life.
Yeah.
Because he would walk around and take it, and then by the time he came home, he'd look down, he'd find bits of his cassock gone, all tattered because they were cutting it off.
He'd be like, "Look at this, that was a new cord last week."
Old ladies were chopping out pieces of Padre Pio's habit as he was walking. He got very upset about that.
But you bring up, and Simon too brought up an important point, because there's been confusion in this area as to who actually has legal rights over the body. Some people are outraged that this was even brought, in court at all, and that the church shouldn't have to be battling over this in court. Well, here's the thing. As Simon mentioned, according to law, the person with the full legal rights and custody over the remains is the closest living relative. In this case, it's Joan Sheen Cunningham. And the reason Terence Cardinal Cook came to her in 1979 to ask permission to bury him in St. Patrick's is because she has the legal rights over his body. They had to get her permission. And yet in this case, when she says, well, I would like him now to be moved over to Peoria, instead of honoring her wishes and, her legal rights over his body, they say, well, no, now you can't do it.
Well, that's how they finished up the court order. They said, you had to go.
So Trollo, which is a name that's very familiar to us, from what we have been told from sources, he was behind all of this. Because he's a very powerful man. If people have watched our shows and reports, he's actually the guy who runs everything behind the scenes.
You can probably see a cash cow going on there. You're making a little Sheen
but
Center.
he actually sent a letter to Joan Sheen
bobbleheads,
Joan told, she got a letter from him in the beginning of this whole process that kind of made arguments as to why they would not be moving the body. So he was involved in all this behind the scenes, and he's not a good person at all.
So 2016, there's about a month and a half left of it. Brexit, the Cubs, Trump, this.
I know, because the Diocese of Peoria had asked the faithful, all during this 2-year deadlock, that we pray for a good outcome to this matter. It also recently asked that people petition Archbishop Sheen in a novena. Many offered up prayers for this, and now we see the results. And we saw as well how God answered the prayers of the faithful in the 54-day Rosary Novena for our nation, promoted by Cardinal Raymond Burke, ending in the victory over Hillary Clinton and the party of death on November 9th. So the lesson in all of this is that God is not deaf to the pleas of his people. He does hear his children's prayers. It's true, we oftentimes have to endure many trials and many hardships, but we can also rejoice in these victories God grants us and give him thanks for his kindness in answering our prayers. So I think it's fitting that we close this show with a prayer of thanksgiving to Our Lady, to whom Archbishop Sheen had such a deep devotion. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis